Welcome once again to Along the Rio Grande. I'm George Torak, and joining us today is Susan Goodman Novick. She's the Director of Collections with the Paso al Norte Immigration Museum, and she's here to tell us all about the plans for this wonderful new museum and how they're beginning to build collections, things that people will be able to go and see and experience once this museum is in place. Susan, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me join you, George.
Maybe we should start by explaining to our viewers what the Paso al Norte Immigration Museum project has been. What exactly will it be?
Well, let me give you a little background about the museum project. It was conceived in 1998 by a number of people, including Diana Natalicio, the president of UTEP. After reading a story by Victor Villarreal, who is a well-known Hispanic author, about making the passage north to the United States from Mexico, she realized that there was no museum that talked about the contributions of the immigrants who have come from the South, from Mexico, and from other countries through Mexico to the United States. We see this museum as sort of the Ellis Island of the Southwest, and we want it to be a nationally known museum that people will come to El Paso to see.
And who's involved in developing the museum? Who's working on this?
Well, at this point, there are three of us on the museum staff. Marguerite Rivera House, who is the executive director, and I work with her on developing collections, but at this point, everything else. And we have an administrative assistant, Norma Aratia. We are also working on some projects with the Oral History Institute at UTEP. And Christine Navarro is the director of that. And we work with her on some projects that the Institute is doing that are very exciting.
Now, immigration plays a very important role in El Paso history, and I imagine this is what the museum will highlight in many ways. Why is immigration important here?
Immigration is important in El Paso because so many of the people who came through, a number of people came through El Paso on their way up north. This was the largest port of entry. And there's a very rich history of people who have come through El Paso on their way to Chicago or to Los Angeles. Sure. There's so many stories, and these are the stories that we want to tell in this museum because they are important. They provide another aspect of American history that is not taught in the schools. We want to enrich that history and make people who have come, whose families have come from the South, more excited about their heritage.
Now, there's been a lot of planning that's been taking place. What's gone on so far? I know that there have been a number of meetings over the last few years. What stage are we at? Well,
at this point, we are still in the planning process because we want our museum to be a very well-based, in fact, history museum. We want there to be we want to plan so that we don't do anything wrong. And the reason I say that is because I go to museums all over the country asking for advice and guidance, and people say, well, don't do what we did. So we're taking all that input and synthesizing it. The planning for the museum, there was a major conference in 2001 here in March, where we gathered people locally, nationally, who had an interest in immigration, and especially immigration from the South. And we got these people together to help us frame the questions that we would like to address in this museum. What stories should we tell? How should we tell the stories? And what would be the next steps that we would take? This information was synthesized into a report that we worked on. At the same time, we were putting together an international advisory council that provides guidance to us. January of 2002, we had our first meeting with this very, very important group of people who have been very willing to provide information, provide their guidance on how we should set up this museum. And we will be, in the next couple of months, I would say in the next 6 months, going and speaking to people in the El Paso community to engage their enthusiasm for this project.
Wow. Now, you're in charge of collections. What's your background? What experience do you have in these areas?
Well, I've always been a history fan. I was the person who, whenever we went to see my grandmother, I would instantly go to all the scrapbooks and look at all the old photographs. And fortunately, I have a number of family photographs that I need to work on processing, making sure that the photos are identified so that future generations can see who these folks were. I have a history degree from Smith College in Massachusetts, and then about 6 or 7 years ago, I went to library school in Washington, D.C., and got a master's in library science with a concentration in archives and special collections.
Oh.
And I have worked at the museum now for over 1.5 years and have worked in conjunction with Claudia Rivers, the head of special collections at UTEP. We've been working on various projects together, and a number of UTEP's collections that deal with immigration have been the basis for many of our brochures and pamphlets that we've produced.
What's involved in building a collection? How do you start to conceive a collection for a museum project like this?
Well, one has to be very careful because you could get the contents of somebody's house if you don't plan correctly. What we are in the process of doing is putting together a collections policy that says this is what we want to collect. These are the time horizons that we want to collect. These are the kinds of artifacts or papers, diaries, letters that we want to collect. So we're in the process of putting together that collection policy. When the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. was under development, they had no place to store things, and we have heard stories of people who had canisters, gas canisters, in their garages waiting because they were afraid that if they didn't save that, that it would have been destroyed.
Sure.
And we hope that, I hope that I don't have to store artifacts in my garage before the museum opens. But we want to have people start thinking about what they might have that helps tell the story that we want to tell.
What are we interested in collecting? What would be some examples of things that will be useful in the museum?
We want documents. We're looking for documents like crossing cards, expired passports that show how people have gone back and forth. We want to have placards that are in English and in Spanish that talk about the mobility between the United States and Mexico. Family papers, family letters that were written, for instance, by people who fled the revolution back to their relatives in Mexico. We want letters from people who, for instance, went through Mexico because they couldn't get into the United States in the 1920s as a result of the quotas that the United States had. We want there to be an exhibit of what people had to go through to come to this country to make a better life for themselves.
And how do you begin researching and pursuing objects like this? Do you just put out a notice that this is what you're looking for, or? I
have spoken to people. A number of people have said, well, you know, I have a box in the basement or in the attic or in the bedroom that my grandmother gave to me, and I don't know what's in there. And I really should probably take a look. And I tell people that I will go and help them sort through that information. And I always ask people to identify the people in the photographs. And well, photographs are a great indicator of how society, how culture was at a certain time. So we're going to be collecting many, many images of daily life.
And we're going to look at some photographs here in just a minute. What kind of interesting things have we found so far? What kinds of treasures have we uncovered?
Well, we have found a number of documents. Marguerite House, her father's family was from Mexico, and her grandfather was a general in the Mexican army, and they had to flee the revolution. And she has some, I guess, notebooks or family letters that her family has saved. These are the kinds of things that we're going to be collecting. At this point, we don't have room for these objects, but we will plan for there to be storage, very adequate storage, environmentally safe, organized, so that we can provide access to these collections.
And the collections will serve to help you interpret things for exhibits, but this is also a research collection?
It will very much be a research collection. We want to be able to draw researchers and the general public to El Paso to look at immigration in this area. But we also want this museum to show how two peoples can live pretty comfortably along the border as far as not having a lot of conflict, and the interdependency of the two countries.
Now, we have some very interesting photographs to look at today.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the source of these photographs? This is from a studio, correct?
It's the Casasola Photograph Studio that was on South El Paso Street. These photographs, many of which are negatives, actually there are 30,000 negatives, were found by construction men who were helping to knock down the store that the Casasola studio, the building that the Casasola studio was in. This was in the 90s. And these construction workers came upon these boxes of dusty negatives, and they took them to Ho Barron, who took some of the prints that were in these boxes, but said he wouldn't be able to do anything with the negatives. And so he called Claudia Rivers at UTEP and said, you might be interested in these things. So Claudia and some students worked on cleaning the negatives and organizing them. And about 3 years ago, she and some other students started scanning the negatives, digitizing the negatives, so that they could be accessible. And we have been working with Claudia and the Digital Media Center in putting together the scanned photographs and a database, so that hopefully in the next 6 months we'll have a website where people can go and help identify these portraits. All of the portraits, the only information we have is the date. And sometimes we don't even have the date. And seeing our enthusiasm for this project encouraged us to, before we put the information on the website, to publish them in the El Paso Times and in El Diario. And we do this weekly. And people say to me, oh, we can't wait for each Monday to come to see the new Casasola photograph. And what I have done is I brought some of the photographs that have been identified to share some of the stories behind these photographs, because a picture really is worth 1,000 words.
And this is a studio that was in operation for some time?
It opened in 1928, and then Alfonso Casasola died in 1948. His wife, Emma Casasola, continued the studio until about 1990, I believe, right before she passed away. Wow. So it was a studio where people would go and have all of their pictures taken, First Communion pictures, graduation pictures, wedding pictures, everything. And it really was it was a very special place for a number of people in this community.
So these are almost all pictures of people?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Terrific. Let's take a look at some. They sound fascinating.
Okay. This is a 1940 portrait of a wedding of Juventino Muela and Margarita Alba. And they were born and raised in El Paso, and they went to Guardian Angel School. A number of their neighbors at the school called about them. And Juventino was the first Hispanic valedictorian of Cathedral High School, and he went on to serve in the Army in World War II.
What period is that from?
1940. 1940. Here's a First Communion picture in 1930, and the children are Josefino de Avila and Juan de Avila. And their father was born in Chihuahua and was a circus performer and had a circus that traveled throughout southern New Mexico. And it's interesting because he only had one leg, and he was a trapeze artist. So he was very, very talented. And the daughter of the little girl in this picture was the person who called to identify her mom. This is a very glamorous picture of Francisca Irigoyen, and this picture was taken about the time of her wedding. She is still alive, Many people who called had gone over to her house and said, Francisca, this is you, this is you. She worked for Glass Apparel, and she organized fashion shows here in El Paso and in Juarez. And a number of her friends have reconnected with her as a result of this picture in the paper. This is one of my favorites. It's the four Edwards sisters, and they all have very curly hair in this picture. I received calls from many people who knew them, but the best one was from Elsie Partridge, who is the second from the left, because she was 7 when this picture was taken, and she thought she looked ridiculous. Her aunt had done the curls to get them ready for this studio portrait, and you can sort of tell by the look on her face that she's not a happy camper. This is a portrait of a family which includes a Border Patrol officer, and this gentleman was a Mormon and grew up in Mexico and Chihuahua in Colonia Juarez, which is a Mormon settlement, but he was a Border Patrol officer. So we get all different segments of the community here. This is a wonderful picture of a family. The kids are all standing up very straight, and artistically it's quite lovely. It was in the El Diario and was identified by some people in Mexico. This wedding portrait is very poignant because the day that this portrait was run, on December 23rd, the son of the bride and groom passed away. And many family members called me and said, it's a miracle that this picture was in the paper at the same time, because it makes us feel that Luis has gone to be with his mom and his dad. And I cried, and they cried, and it was a very poignant day. Not all of the photographs have been identified, and here is one of a very distinguished gentleman who a number of people have called. And 2 people called and said that he was either Rabbi Zelenka or Rabbi Roth, who were both rabbis here in El Paso at about the same time with different congregations. And, but I can't get positive identification on this gentleman. This is a little boy who we call in the office Charo Boy, because he's very cute, from 1938. And no one was able to identify him either. This is a wedding portrait that was taken in 1937, and it was in the first newsletter of the Immigration Museum, but we haven't received any calls about that one. This is another one of my favorites. It's the 3 Tarango brothers, and David, Felipe, and Daniel. And their mother passed away in 1940, right before this, 2 years before this portrait was taken, and they were raised by their grandmother. But they all are still alive, and they all live in town, and I talked to one of them and made copies of the pictures so that they could all enjoy them. And this is a picture of a wedding portrait of Alvina Blancas and Conrado Chacon. And she was 18 and he was 24. She was born in Clifton, Arizona. Her father was a miner, but she was born in Juarez. And Conrado was from Camargo, Chihuahua, and he came to El Paso when he was 3 years old, fleeing the Mexican Revolution. And Alvina is still alive and celebrated her 89th birthday on February the 1st. And her family asked if we could make some copies of this portrait so that they could give them to her during her birthday celebration. So see, these are some of the beautiful Casa Sola portrait studio photographs that are really engaging the community in what we're going to do, because these are the stories of the people who have lived here. And these are the stories of people who don't get their stories in the paper all the time, and that's why we're very excited about it.
What point are we at in building our collections of photographs? We have sort of a base at UTEP to begin with?
Right. We have a base at UTEP to begin with. UTEP has a very wonderful collection of photographs. In fact, we are working with Claudia on, we've submitted a grant proposal to digitize most of the photograph collections at UTEP, many of which deal with the Mexican, some dealing with the Mexican Revolution, others dealing with immigration. So in partnering with them, we are helping to get information that will be useful for the museum.
And are we interested in people's personal photographs, if people have an interesting image?
Oh, very much so. very much so. And I encourage people to give me a call at the museum if they do have some objects or artifacts that might be collectible for the museum in the next couple of years. At this point, we see the opening of the museum maybe in the next 4 to 5 years. We are still undergoing some planning. And of course, we have to do some major fundraising.
Sure.
And at this point in time, it's a little difficult to do that because individuals, corporations, and foundations are all suffering from the slow economy at this point.
Sure.
So,
and we have a number of museum projects going on.
exactly,
in the area, too.
exactly. We are working with the Institute for Oral History on a very important project called the Bracero Project.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about that. What was the Bracero program? Maybe we should start there.
Well, it was instituted in 1942 to help address labor shortages during World War II. There was an agreement between the United States and Mexico where farm workers from Mexico would come up north to work the fields that were left empty because many of the Americans were in the war.
Sure.
The program went until about 1962. And what we're doing at this point is collecting oral histories of people who were involved in the Bracero program, the workers themselves, people who helped process them at the processing centers along the border, such as Rio Vista in Socorro.
Socorro, right.
We are working with people in Mexico, in California, Chicago, and Austin to help us interview braceros and people who worked in the Bracero program from all over the country. This is a project that is funded by the Ford Foundation and is the first of its kind to do a very major oral history project on the braceros that will provide fantastic primary sources for researchers in the future.
And what is an oral history? How might that be different from the types of history we're familiar with?
Right. An oral history is the result of an interview of a researcher asking an individual about his or her life. These are done, the people who are doing the oral history interviews as part of the Bracero project are graduate students, are bilingual, have been trained in oral history techniques. So they can focus the interviewee on answering the question or guiding them to provide the information that they think will be very important in the interview.
And these are recorded or videotaped?
They are recorded. The exciting part about this project is that in many instances, we go to the interviewee, go to their house, somewhere where they are comfortable.
Sure.
And we take along a computer, a laptop like this, that has a scanner. And we ask people if they would like for us to, if they could provide us with photographs or newspaper articles or other things that we can scan that will help illustrate the story that they're telling us. Sure. And what we're doing with these interviews, they're on little mini discs that can be digitized. So what we are doing in this project is allowing for these interviews to be put on the internet. They are also transcribed, and copies of the transcriptions will be at the UTEP Special Collections Department.
Now, the focus of the museum, I would imagine, is going to be on the Mexican experience coming into the United States, but will it deal with other groups of immigrants as well?
Yes, it will. We want to talk about all of the people who came through these portals to a new life in the United States. We had an interview with a woman from El Paso whose family fled Lithuania and Poland, and they left in the 1920s and they couldn't get into the United States. So they went to Mexico City. And they worked there, raised 3 children in Mexico, and one of the daughters married a man from El Paso. And so she has a very interesting story that Mexico provided a refuge to a number of immigrants for many years who then moved northward to immigrate to the United States. We're going to tell the story of a number of Chinese who immigrated to the United States, who worked on the railroad and afterwards who came through here and immigrated to the United States, and a number of Lebanese and Syrian people in El Paso their forefathers came up through Mexico into the United States. So there are these wonderful stories of so many different people.
And we saw an image of a rabbi, Jewish community in El Paso as well.
Exactly.
That's part of that experience. Terrific. Where do we go from here? What are the next steps that we're looking at in building these collections?
Well, what we want to do in terms of building the collections is build an awareness in the community that these, the things that you have in those boxes are important. And we want people to help us tell these stories by providing us with that information that they have. And concurrently with that, we will be doing major fundraising for the operations of the museum.
Sure.
But I'm right now sort of letting people know that soon we will be asking them to, if they're willing and able, to provide us with that piece of their history that can really help all of us learn more about the immigration experience along this border.
And are we looking at maybe a storage facility before we actually have a museum building or research center?
That will probably be something that we will do because there is excitement about all of this. We just don't want to start asking people to send us things without planning and having something in place that will provide the ability for us to process the information and have it be accessible to researchers.
Do we have people working on the building itself? Do we have an idea of what it might look like or where it might be at this point?
Not at this point. We're still working on exactly what needs we will have for exhibit space, for storage space, for public areas, for administrative offices. We're still working with that, working on finding the best model to use in terms of how much exhibit space we need, how much storage space we need. In every museum that I've gone to, they always say we've run out of space right after they've opened. So we can't have an infinite storage facility, but it will be good to build a museum in a building that will be able to provide us with what we need.
And who can people get in touch with? Where can they get in touch with you if they might have some interesting information or something that they'd like you to take a look at? I
would be more than happy to speak to anybody who has information about the collections that might be appropriate for our museum. They can call me at the museum offices at 747-8679.
Terrific. Well, it certainly sounds like an incredible project, and we all look forward to getting the collections together and building the museum and maybe developing a wonderful research site that people can write all kinds of interesting histories from in the future. Susan Goodman Novick, thank you for coming in and visiting with us today, and certainly for sharing the photographs with us. Maybe we can have you on again in the future as we make some progress in this.
I'd enjoy that very much.
Thank you. And we want to thank all of you as well for joining us today on Along the Rio Grande, and we hope to see you on our next program.